Welcome to the Kaleidoscope Podcast. I'm your host, George Salis. Today's episode is the first segment in an exciting new series. For some years now, I've been writing a column sensationally titled Invisible Books, in which I shine a light on neglected books and their authors. The column has met with surprising success, including new or first editions of a handful of books, such as Mangled Hands by Johnny Stanton and A Long Day in Venice by Abel Passe, translated by George Henson. This new segment is called Invisible Book Buddies, and the concept is simple. I'll read a neglected book with a friend and chat about it. For the first episode, my dear friend Matthew Taylor Blais and I chose Movieland by Ramón Gómez de la Serna, translated into English by Ángel Flores. Originally published in 1930, it was reprinted by Tough Poets in 2022. My guest, Matt, is an independent filmmaker from Vancouver, Canada. His films have been screened worldwide, including at the Berlin International Film Festival. He co-runs Seattle Cinema, a production company and online distributor. On the Seattle Cinema YouTube page, you can find some of his work, including Forest Movie, which boasts 1 million views. He also publishes other filmmakers who are experimental in nature. He's no stranger to the Kaleidoscope either. He's contributed several pieces, the longest being an in-depth review of Mark de Silva's novel, The Logos. And now, he's my first and honored guest for Invisible Book Buddies. So please, enjoy our conversation. Hey Matt, how's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
Pretty good. I'm glad we were able to jump a bunch of hurdles to finally get together, technical hurdles and life hurdles, etc. And thanks for being the first guest of my new and exciting segment.
Truly honored.
What is your earliest experience or notion of Hollywood? For me, when I think of that question, I think of my father at the flea market buying our first DVDs, two incredible classics that have stood the test of time beyond my childhood, and that is Terminator 2 and The Matrix. For me, that's quintessential Hollywood. What about you?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Like, my first notion of what Hollywood is itself, or like my first idea of, or my first experience with something that is Hollywood related, like more to the second way of thinking about it, I would have to say it's probably Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones or Star Wars. So whenever I was homesick from school, I would watch like either of those trilogies. But the reason I remember Indiana Jones more in a Hollywood context is I remember Steven Spielberg's name coming up. I remember that credit sequence. That's what really sticks in my mind, is the way those titles come up. They're so iconic, and that directed by Steven Spielberg, that authorship behind it on a scale like that, I think is probably what it would be. But I don't know what my first notion of like Hollywood itself is, because it's just so part of culture, right? That it's just like, it was just always there. Like I don't know. It's just.
What about the title cards in particular? What do they look like? I can't quite remember them.
Yeah, it's just the font they use, and it comes up over the Harrison Ford. They're walking through the jungle and stuff, and even the studio logo at the start is really like, you should look it up after. Just something about the way the font looks over that, and it's a very mysterious opening too, because that movie is, it's an action film. It's fun. It's really funny, but that as a young kid, that opening sequence is pretty strange and mysterious and feels quite serious. The music and stuff, it's almost creepy, that opening sequence in the jungle for a young kid. So yeah, I always cite Spielberg too as my first real conscious awareness of a person making a movie. So he's Hollywood, so that, I guess that counts, right?
Absolutely. He's prolific, and I did watch The Fabelmans recently, which kind of tied everything together as far as his story and how he started everything out. But to get a little bit on track, you mentioned the behind the scenes of Hollywood was a hazy, vague thing for you as a kid. You didn't have much of a notion of it. But how did that concretize as you grow up?
Yeah, see, that's what I mean, is I think, growing up in the 90s and stuff, it's just so, I mean, I like tabloid stuff, right? It was just always there. Like it felt natural as a kid, right? It's like a part of that kind of really surface level idea of culture. Like maybe in the grocery store at the checkout, seeing the tabloid covers, something like that would have been my first experience with it. And it's hard to know when any sort of, like, when it became conscious in a way at any point before just, who I am now, like just as an adult and having been able to think for myself and reflect on this stuff. But it's hard to pinpoint a moment where there was any sort of shift or real like conscious understanding of it, like a singular event. But certainly I feel different and think differently about it today. But it's just so in the background. It was just a part of life growing up.
As a filmmaker, as an indie filmmaker, how do you see Hollywood? It's still this kind of fantasy land that exists on the other side of the border, as it were.
Well, barely, not even at the other side of the border, right? Because I'm living, if people don't know, in Burnaby, basically Vancouver, Greater Vancouver, and they call it Hollywood North, and a lot of things shoot here because they get the tax credits and all that stuff. So, and I've been to film festivals and kind of been very much on the surface a part of some of that stuff, but yeah, it definitely just feels like a whole other world entirely. And it's funny, this is not completely directly related, but it is related. I've been thinking about that in general, this kind of stuff, about like the kind of filmmaker I am, because when I was younger and full of ambition and stuff, and maybe saw a path for myself towards, making bigger budget narrative films or something like that. Those things, like, that was within my goals, for lack of a better term. Something I did want, and
to get to Hollywood.
I guess, like, I wasn't thinking Hollywood per se, but the freedom and the budgets needed to make ambitious, like, narrative, like large scale narrative projects or something like that. Now that's changed in very natural ways for me as I got older. Like, I do sincerely want to make the stuff I'm making now, but I've also started to realize that, I don't know if I have the temperament. Like, I don't think I have the personality to sell yourself in the way that it's required to even get your foot in the door. Like, there's a fairy tale way of going about it where you just make something on your own terms that's just so good that everyone's like, holy shit, dude, we got to throw the money at this guy. And that's like one in a million. But really, it's a lot of hard work in like a social sort of, whoring yourself sort of way. And, there's this quote, Brad Pitt talking about Terrence Malick when they were doing that Tree of Life stuff, and he said he builds houses, he doesn't sell real estate. And for a long time I saw that as like a philosophy. Like, I was like, oh yeah, brilliant. He's just, that's like a way of living. Like, he builds the houses, he doesn't need to do the PR stuff. That's not, he's above it, or however you want to say it, however you want to see it. It seemed like more of a philosophy for me. In my eyes for a long time, that quote. But I came to realize, I think it's just like like a temperamental thing. Like,
not everybody has the luxury to be like Terrence Malick. He kind of has that luxury.
No, absolutely not. He's a special case. But I mean, his reasoning for not that quote, I think it could almost speak more to like a personality. Like he would do it if he could. You know, he's just too shy or whatever, or not. I don't think I'm really shy. It's just I just can't. Like, I'm at a point now, if I were to make a new film and like promote it, like I don't even think I could say a single thing about it. Like, it's just so hard. It just feels so. I just want to put it out there and have it be, you know, people like it on its own terms or not. I don't even want to have any part of promoting it, I guess, for lack of a better term. It's weird, and I think my roundabout way of answering this is like, I think that you need to be very much in that mindset to have even a chance of breaking into that world.
And even when you get your foot in the door, then you're locked in and you have to see the project to completion. I just listened to Martin Scorsese talk about how he almost quit making films twice because he was so weighed down by the responsibility that comes with a high budget major motion picture. But let's move now to the book proper, Movieland by Ramón Gómez de la Serna. Is that enough flavor for you?
You can be the one I'm going to say that guy. You can say the name.
That
I'm going to
guy.
butcher it.
Well, so you've never been to Hollywood, correct?
I have been to LA. Yeah.
Okay. So you've had firsthand experience.
Yeah.
And how does that firsthand experience stack up against De La Serna's Movieland?
Pretty good, actually. It's a strange place. There's a quality of, you see it in the movies too. They try to capture it in movies set there. I mean, a lot are set in LA, obviously, but there's a definitely like an orangey glow. Like, when I think about it, like if you're gonna make a film that's very much about LA or Hollywood, speaking as like a northern Canadian guy, you need that kind of sun. You need that orange light, and I feel like this book captures how the air feels, how the light feels. But weirdly enough, and this will get into something maybe we'll talk about later, when I read the book, I saw it in black and white, the action, because I know it was written in the 20s, and Hollywood at this time, you know, is silent and black and white, obviously. So I saw a lot of the book in my head in black and white. So I know I kind of just contradicted myself there, but yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm more susceptible to book covers, and the Tough Poets reprint has an actress who is just bathed in this blue-hued light. So that was kind of what colored my perception a bit. It's not like I saw the whole book through a blue lens.
She is like monochromatic, right? Like there isn't a, see, I wasn't even influenced by that. That's really interesting because I read it on an ebook. I read the PDF, so I didn't see the cover while reading it, but that kind of tracks what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I had to ask my friend Nick. He's a book collector, and he has the first English translation edition. It's extremely rare to find, and that has a kind of actor figure on the front, almost like an Art Deco statue, and it's bright gold with a blue background. So that's a whole nother conversation of how a cover can affect the perception of a reading experience.
Totally.
But we should emphasize that De La Serna has never been, or back in the day, he never went to Hollywood. He never did research. So it's pretty amazing that you said he was able to capture that glow and that essence of a place he never visited. Do you think it would be better off had he visited Hollywood or no?
Yeah, well, because I don't know how much of the heavy lifting I'm doing myself there as well, but I think a lot of the things he touches on are what is triggering these things, these images and these feelings and these colors to go off in my mind anyway. So I don't know. Well, I think maybe that gets into a larger philosophical conversation about how much how much, what does lived experience say matter in regards to knowledge, right? I don't think you have to have had experienced being in Hollywood and working and living there to write a good book about it. And I think that could go for most things. So on the one hand, you mentioned you didn't do research. If that's the case, then yeah, maybe his book would have been better in certain specific ways. But I don't think, if you write a good book and you never went there, I mean, whatever. I don't think you need to have that element to do a good job. And Hollywood is so, it's different then, but you ask anyone, they're going to have there's going to be somewhat of a crossover with what you think about it, right?
To be clear, Ángel Flores in his introduction says that De la Serna had never been to Hollywood and had never been to the USA.
The USA,
yeah. He could have very well have done secondary research, like watching the films themselves and being enamored by them.
Definitely.
But what you say definitely applies to a novel like this, which is highly surreal, fantastic, definitely not grounded in the reality that you and I would know from a day-to-day basis, to say the least.
Yes.
And as far as plot, there is no real traditional plot here. Instead, the book is composed of vignettes that overlap, intersect with each other, sometimes featuring a character that we had met earlier, sometimes not. The characters kind of pop in and pop out of the Movieland spotlight, as it were. Before I ask you my next question, I wanted to just ask, what was your general impression of the novel? Did you enjoy it? Because we both read this for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I have a good take on this. So my impression, I did enjoy it. You mentioned the translator's intro as well. I actually thought that was really well written. That was really interesting. There's some good prose in that introduction. This guy's a good translator. I think the translation was really interesting. I mean, I can't speak for the original prose, but I thought he in its own right was really interesting, and I could see that from the introduction as well. And he mentioned something in the introduction that it's this, kind of super idealized version of Hollywood, more than usual even. And, even at the time when Hollywood's relatively new, I'm asking myself, like, do we need this? Like, Hollywood kind of is so idealized already. And, don't I already idolize it and idealize it enough myself in certain ways, just by loving a lot of Hollywood movies and stuff like that? And I was thinking, well, unless it's satire, right? And I think it is. I think largely there's a lot of stuff. The translator doesn't really get into this, but I think there's a lot in the book that is, Hollywood's in the crosshairs in this book.
And at the same time, he undoubtedly loves
exactly
the art that comes out of Hollywood. So there's a nice balance there, I think.
There's a nice balance. And so the balance there, I think they inform each other quite nicely. And the idealized element that the translator was talking about, what I'm trying to get to here is my impression of it, and I think you can view it through that lens, was that this book is kind of like a fable, kind of like a myth. It felt like one of my earliest impressions of it is it felt like I was reading like a modernized translation of an old myth. And you had like a fairy tale vibe to it. And I think the vignettes and like the way he gets into like these types and categories of villains and different people that live in the world. I'm gonna get blasted for saying this, but it almost felt like Homer. It almost felt like the way he describes elements of the army and people within the armies and stuff like that. So it felt like formally it was written like a myth. I'm certainly not an expert in that regard. So I don't know how off I am, but it felt like I was reading this kind of like updated, modernized translation of a very, very old story.
I pretty much have to agree with you because I was just starstruck, pun intended, by this book. And, I'm a sucker for myths, and in my own work,
Yeah.
I reach toward modern myths while also paying homage to Homeric myths and other ancient myths, etc. So that's one reason why I loved this. Not even because I love film, but that also helped.
Yeah.
But yeah, what about all the vignettes? There's so many to choose from and just kind of savor. Is there one in particular that stuck out to you more than the rest?
There's a couple, and it's funny. It's kind of jumping off point from what you just said because, I knew before recording this how much you love the book, and I had a theory that whether it was conscious or not, that it was because, well, not only because, or at least, scrap that part, but rather a general feeling I had about this book in general too, is that it felt very much like something you would write. It felt
I'll take that as a compliment.
Well, it's a short book, right? It's a pretty slight short book. And in many ways, it felt like I was reading a section of Echoes of like your upcoming novel, which has all these novels within novels. I think it would work as something like that. And speaking about favorite sections in vignettes, a lot of them are just like, dude, this is totally a George thing, a totally George idea. Like the insane asylum for actors who believe they're their characters. Like that's a George idea. Like this, I felt like I was reading something you had sent me or something like that. So.
And I felt like I was reading a kindred spirit. And you mentioned
Totally.
The book is so short. That is one of the few criticisms I have, was that some of the vignettes seem way too underdeveloped, and several chapters have a handful of vignettes tucked in there, and I would have wanted them to be fleshed out much more. And I would have probably, if I had written this, it would probably be 3, 4, 5 times the length.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, there a couple I really liked. The ones that most felt like something you would write to were usually the ones I liked the most. The actors, the Asylum for the Blind. There was I can't remember the name. This might be the actual name of it. Luminous Women. There was a chapter or something about luminous women that was going off about consecrated darkness. And it was filled with ideas and phrases like that, like consecrated darkness, and that was a big standout. And
let's unpack Asylum for the Blind. That is definitely one of the vignettes that stuck out to me. And the concept is that the citizens of Movieland, most especially actors and people working behind the scenes, slowly lose their sight because the production lights of Movieland are so hyperbolically bright. And then once they lose their sight, they're hidden in the Asylum for the Blind. I loved that concept so much because it's so insane but grounded.
This is definitely top 3.
That's kind of how De La Serna works. He has an idea and he follows it to its maximum logical or illogical conclusion, but it's dream logic, really, without feeling totally random, because it's grounded by this foundation of Movieland.
Yeah. I think the best thing in the book are just at the creative idea level, like just these kind of novel connections between things, that the lights are so bright that they're slowly blinding the actors and the crew and stuff, and then they end up in this asylum, which is again a total George idea. It's like, I was like, oh, no wonder he's loving this book so much. But it's like what the book is getting at, what the bigger picture of it is and stuff. Yeah, it's a satire and stuff like that. Like we could get into that, but I think almost just, and not even, I don't even mean this as a criticism, but on the surface level of it, I think is the best thing about it, if that makes sense. Just what it's presenting to you, what you see is what you get level of things. Like, so just these ideas and these kind of surreal images and surreal ideas and situations and descriptions and stuff, and phrases too, which, you know, again, props to the translator. There's a phrase in there that was so simple, describing flesh, describing it as warm marble. And I noted that as one example of, there's a lot of descriptions of things that are like that, where it's not necessarily surreal or crazy surreal, but far from the regular way of describing it. But like you said, exactly how you describe it, grounded in reality. So not normal, but grounded in reality, which I think something like warm marble as flesh is as an example of that. And yeah, I think that's just what I like most about the book, honestly.
And you say it kind of harkens back to Homeric myths and other types of myths, but I also wanted to emphasize that by any stretch of the imagination, De La Serna is a futurist.
Yeah.
And there are sections in this novel that feel, in some sense, ahead of its time. I mentioned to you about the seeing sleep, he called it. It's this top secret Hollywood industry backup plan. And I actually can let me read a section from it so we can give our listeners a better idea of what this top secret plan is. So, the day that some catastrophe forces Movieland to become something else than what it is, its directors will put that carefully guarded invention to work, and the whole movie spectacle will be turned upside down. A little is known about the new miracle, but only very vaguely. Some discharged employee failed to guard the seal of silence that surrounds new inventions and let fall a hint of the movie of the future and its possibilities. Its basis is the overcoming of spectator immobility and the possibility of moving him toward the field of truth without his having to live it with all the consequent dangers of the drama and its incidents. He will always be the spectator, but he will be moved forward toward events, carried straight to the mountainous heights of true landscape and true argument by means of electric, radiographic, and fifth-dimensional forces in the new apparatus, etc. So, yes, that's very visionary, I would say, and almost goes even beyond the trend that we live through regarding 3D films and even the 4D experience where they blow air into your face and whip your legs with little fibers or something. And goes beyond that and enters a kind of virtual reality, like the metaverse, for instance, where we would experience films in a kind of hyperdimensional environment. What did you make of all that?
Yeah, it sounds like VR. Sounds like video games a little bit. I think actually VR. It sounds like VR is what he's describing, but what he means, I think, is closer to video games too. This idea of you're a spectator, but you're far more involved in the world with no consequences, right? So, I guess in a video game, you're not a spectator so much because you can make decisions and you control the actions, but you are, generally guided by a narrative or rules or things like that. But I'm thinking of it in terms of like being able to actually not just say watch violence as one example, but engage in it consequence free, which makes me think of video games.
Exactly. So when does the concept of a film break down? Would this Hollywood backup plan be even considered, film anymore? Or?
Yeah, that's the other thing too. It doesn't sound like he's talking about movies anymore, and this isn't something I've given a whole bunch of thought, but a part of me does think that if you were to successfully make, say, a VR movie, I think we're talking about a different medium now. Video games obviously are, but I think VR would be too. Like when it gets to the point beyond novelty where it actually is, and it may be there now, I don't know, but where it's engaged with a large level, maybe approaching movies in terms of popularity, if we get to that point. Those things, whatever they are, that are so popular and successful, probably aren't movies, because in VR you can still look around you and engage with the world. If I can imagine, if it was a VR movie, maybe you're in the driver's seat in a car chase or something like that. But so that's, to me, that's closer to, and this is what VR kind of is promising, is it's an experience at a maybe a deeper level, not necessarily emotionally, but physically, I guess we could call it. It's just a different experience. You're sitting in the driver's seat, you feel like you're there, but you can control where you look, right? And a movie is an art form, a medium, conveying things through a certain way. It has its restrictions, it has its rules. They're there for a reason. That's what makes them movies. And one of those things, with the biggest element of its formalism, is shot selection. And you lose that with VR. You don't have an authorship there where someone is, of course you have an authorship, right? I'm not saying that video games or VR aren't art or can't be or whatever, but it's in a different, I feel like it's in a different realm, so to speak, because in movies, you have, the authorship is behind, this is what you're seeing and that's it. This is what you're hearing and that's it. And then you're going to hear this and see this. And then you're going to hear this and see this. And the juxtaposition of those things is what is making the movie what it is. And if you can choose where to look at any given moment in the experience, outside of the frame, so to speak, where you can literally say turn your head around or go in a different direction, that's not a movie anymore.
Even many video games these days are reaching toward truly cinematic experiences. I'm thinking of Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding, an experience that features these A-list actors like Mads Mikkelsen and Lydia Sado, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then you have David Cage, who created Beyond Two Souls, featuring Willem Dafoe and Page. But I think whether we're talking about video games, film, or this hazy virtual reality space, the essence that connects all of them and more is escapism. How much is Hollywood films, or any kind of film, escapist for the average viewer, or for you in particular?
Hollywood or movies in general? Hollywood more so. Definitely for general audiences, I think there's nothing to be ashamed of, let's say, or I have no issue, coming from the kind of films I make or what I like. There's no issue for a second with wanting to escape the drudgeries of your life, of the work day, and go see something fun and entertaining. And I think, I definitely turn to Hollywood to provide that. And I think, though, that there's an element too that people maybe don't see nearly as often, of a craftsmanship, formalism in Hollywood movies, in the best of them, that are on par with other stuff that people might be closer to consider art, or sooner to consider art, more so than something in Hollywood. I think the best Hollywood movies, the best Hollywood directors are really understand the medium as good as anyone. And the Hollywood movies I like most, while I turn to Hollywood for escapism, I think that the best ones edify me in the same ways that art films do, or experimental films do. Not literally the same way, but I mean, they scratch that itch too. Like, there's some amazing formalism in great Hollywood films, and amazing images and beautiful images too. And I don't think that escapism necessarily has to limit that, or at least even if I'm turning to it for escapism, it's providing those things as well. That's certainly possible. So for me, speaking personally, I would say no, it isn't just escapism. If it is, fine, but I'm probably not going to remember that movie the next day, kind of thing, right? I speaking for other people, like that is what a lot of people want. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with it, but for me, I would want a little bit more most of the time. 95% of the time, I want a little bit more.
What makes a Hollywood film more escapist than, say, a European film?
More escapist?
Because you seem to suggest that Hollywood films have a higher degree of escapism, or no?
Yeah. I would describe it as sort of getting lost in the film, right? Like that kind of, you forget you're watching it, so to speak, which is really hard for me to do and doesn't necessarily have to happen to be good, obviously. I think actually it can happen with movies that are quite bad. The same way you can find yourself crying or welling up with tears at something that you consciously know is just awful or totally saccharine or just so manipulative. It's like, you're getting manipulated, but you're still like starting to cry. So I think escapism has an element of that is more prevalent in Hollywood films. They're so good at it, even when you can like recognize it as totally false.
What are some examples?
Oh geez, I don't remember them because they weren't good films. No, I'm just kidding.
What was the last one that caused you to reach for the tissue box?
Last one that made me, oh man. Did you see the new Adam Sandler film? This is a bad example because I like him. He has a new film that he made with like all his daughters.
I have not seen it.
Maybe that one, but it is actually moving though. The ending of that one. I didn't cry, but like it's manipulative. It's like really like kind of over the top moving. But I think, I don't want to get off topic, but I think that works because that movie is certainly contextualized by the audience that it's for, which is not me. It's like 13, 14-year-old girls. But Adam Sandler makes like perfect 3 out of 5 star movies. Like I wouldn't rate, one of his like murder mystery movies more than like 3 stars, but in some ways they're essentially faultless. Like there's nothing wrong with those movies. If you think there's something wrong with them, it's like, why are you even watching them? It's that kind of deal where it's just like, you get exactly what it does, what it says on the tin, right? So
exactly.
Kind of a bad example, but I would say that one because it wasn't, I wasn't the intended audience and I could see what it was doing, but it still kind of got me.
Yeah. Well, moving back to the concept of this futuristic seeing sleep and the fact that De La Serna is looking outward into the future as much as backward. For all the prescient qualities of this book, it still has products of its time, and you and I would be remiss if we didn't mention the several racist sections that cover minorities, Asians, and African Americans. My perception of that was it's in line with the hyperbole, and that everyone in this novel is being held up to a funhouse mirror, as it were, and being distorted in various ways. And at the same time, the way minorities are portrayed in this book is the same way they were portrayed and still are portrayed in instances in Hollywood films. I don't know what your take was.
Yeah. I mean, I wish it could just be like, oh, this is just a product of its time, and kind of, if it's just like a small part of the book, you could ignore it. But unfortunately, it's kind of a substantial part of the book. Like, it's a short book, and you have to grapple with it. And yeah, it's a tough one because on the one hand, like I said, I think everyone in this book, as you're kind of saying, is in the crosshairs. And a lot of the, white elite class actors, whatever, are not let off the hook as well. For me, though, it got a little distracting because I think especially with the African Americans, he just it takes it further than necessary. Because for me, it's like, if this is satire or, you know, a reflection on how they're portrayed in Hollywood, you know, I would have expected it to stay within sort of the bounds of, or restrict it to the perception of them, right? So whether that's the, you know, actors or the elite class in the novel, the way they see them, because there's a lot of those interactions between them, you could do it in a way that limits it to just how they're seen by others. But I feel like, for me personally, it goes outside of that a little bit into just, you know, I don't want to say what the author thinks there, because I don't know, but I think it just gets taken too far. Like, if everything's being satirized, then they're the biggest target.
It's obviously a touchy subject, and anyone who's approaching this book should be aware of those things so they aren't caught off guard. It is in line with, whether it goes too far or not, it is in line with the kinds of caricatures and the type of racism you found back in the day, and in some ways very relevant still today. Whether de la Serna espouses those views or not is kind of a different question, but yes, readers should keep that in mind. And to move on a little bit, I want to talk about a section that mentions film adaptions. And I'm going to read this section, then we can talk about it. A character says, "The works of the great masters of literature live gorgeously in the films that have been made of them," said one of the cast. "Don't you believe it? When they come to life, they are lost." Someone else says, "There is no fragrance left in a book after a film has been made of it. Poor authors. They are seduced by a siren who first muddles things up and then dries the life out of them." Then you don't think that a great novel is improved by being filmed? Not in the least. It is destroyed, rendered null and void, sent back into the darkness of the unimagined. What do you find funny about that?
Oh, just that he's just ripping movies apart there.
How much do you agree with his take?
You know, I think I want to say I disagree, but so I could go along on this. There's a couple ways we could approach this. He specifically says great novel. So on that front, I'm probably going to lean more to agreeing. But I think there's a difference between adaptation and what I think of it and what I think it should be, versus just merely transcribing a novel to the medium of movies. I think the latter is what usually happens, and that's what makes really, really bad movies out of great books. I think the greatest of books probably aren't adaptable anyways, and if they are, they're not going to look anything like the book, and they shouldn't. You're adapting what makes the book a great work of art into an entirely other medium. If you're just literally transcribing it over, it's going to just look a lot like you just took the same characters' names and the same things happen. But if you're just making a traditional movie telling a story, the form is of the movie is going to completely lack what makes most great books so great, right? Their inventiveness and their, I'm thinking like someone like Joyce, right? It's just a really easy example to go off from. And I actually have the Ulysses movie adaptation. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm interested to see how that was done. Because my guess is if the movie is just going to look like any other movie and you're just adapting everything else about Ulysses, you're gonna suck the life out of it, so to speak. If you're gonna adapt it and try to capture those elements that are missing, it might not resemble the book in a lot of ways. And then I think another way to look at it about just adaptation in general is, I think usually, like if we're not talking about great books, I actually think the opposite is true. I'd say kind of like a cliche in culture, like it's almost like a proverb that the book is always better than the movie. Not at all. I think the movie is usually better than the book, because most books don't have Joycean prose. They aren't interesting in those ways. They aren't great works. Like a lot of the things that get adapted are, genre books, thrillers, whatever. And you get a sort of opposite effect where the sort of boring prose of like a airplane paperback novel gets turned into, if you're lucky, pretty bland, normal, inoffensive images. And then instead of spending 8 hours or 10 hours or 6 hours or whatever with this story, now you're only spending an hour and a half. So it cuts out all the fat. So if I had the choice between reading, the bestseller thriller and watching like the shitty Netflix adaptation, I'm going for the Netflix every time. And it's funny because if you look, actually, to take this further, if you look back at a lot of the great movies that Hollywood was making up through until the new Hollywood came in, up till the 60s or so, that whole period, huge amounts of them were based on novels that no one has ever heard of. Tons of westerns and film noirs, and they're all based on books that nobody knows anything about. And that's because the novels are just serving as the sort of skeleton for the story and the characters, and everything else that makes movies are coming from the hands of the crew and the directors and the editing and the things that make movies special. And you have Dana Andrews, his face up there with the lighting, and the composition and the rhythm of the film in a film noir. You don't get that in the books that they're based off of, because they're kind of just whatever books. So a lot of great movies are based off totally mediocre books, and a lot of shitty movies are based off even worse books. Not many great movies are based off truly great books, in the way that makes, at least speaking for myself, a lot of my favorite books, what makes them so great. They're not really even adaptable. So overall, I disagree in like a kind of a conventional way, but I also agree that in many cases, great books are going to have their life sucked out of them if they're not handled by someone who can bring the same inventiveness to the medium of movies.
I do think people underestimate the number of films that are based on books. There's so many, in fact, that many films I love, I don't even realize or remember their adaptions. But two of the biggest elements with a film adaptation that cannot quite get translated are the prose itself and much of the interiority of characters, and that's a bit easier to get onto the celluloid, as it were, but the prose, that is more often than not lost. And I think one of the ways that directors or whoever is working on this adaptation, one of the ways they try to get over that is narration, which I don't know how often that works. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm thinking of Hannibal with Mads Mikkelsen. Loved that series, and it's based on a very popular commercial writer, Thomas Harris, I believe. And the people who adapted that series decided to take some of the prose proper, turn it into dialogue, and it comes across as alien and ethereal, but in a way that works.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with this high functioning fallen angel psychopath.
Yeah.
Among other things.
Yeah, that works too. I mean, John Huston to stay on Joyce in his adaptation of The Dead, that's what he does. That last amazing section, the last few pages just get read out loud over images, and it works. But you're touching on basically what I'm talking about. So think of it this way. You take a sentence like, he went to the store. How would a great writer write that, right? Okay, so I'm not going to try to my own way of writing that into like a masterpiece sentence, but you can just imagine in great literature the equivalent of that, right? If you don't have the adaptation in the hands of a movie genius, let's say, or a great stylist, those amazing words just become information. They just turn back into he went to the store, and then you just get a shot of someone walking into a store. So you need someone who can match the prose in images, in light, color, in the film's style. And a lot of adaptations don't have that. Now, the interiority you can get with great actors, right? Because to me, great actors have presence. I think presence is more important than what maybe you would go to acting school for traditionally. I would there's no real way to prove this, but I would argue that for every great star, there's probably 4 or 5 other people, in their class who can act as well as them, but they don't have presence. And that's why there's also great actors or movie stars that actually aren't that great at acting, like technically, but they have presence. So you can get across some of this interiority with, a facial expression. I think the human face, it's one of the tenets of cinemas, the human face. A lot can come through just a look. And if you can get an actor that can make their face look like, what these thoughts are written out in the book, you can get at something. You can get at it a little bit, and then you can get at the prose with the style. And you can see how it's a totally different domain, right? Like, you're talking literally about what the character's thinking versus a look on a face. You're talking about how things are described versus, how they look or how they're presented on screen or how they're edited. But so that's why you need people working in the medium of film who are up to that task, who have the same amount to give creatively in these, arguably completely other areas. And if you don't have that, all of that artistry is getting turned into information. It's getting turned into he went to the store. So
yeah. In a book, he went to the store could be a sentence. You could stretch it out into a paragraph. It could be a whole chapter. He went to the store could turn into a novel. And I don't think film has that kind of elasticity to it. At least not in Hollywood films. There might be some experimental stuff out there that could prove me wrong, but
you could put a shot of someone going to the store in slow-mo, make it last 2 hours.
Zack Snyder's the Snyderverse. Okay, well, we have a few questions here. This one's a bit of a silly one. Who would you choose to adapt Movieland into a major motion picture?
Maybe this is kind of a cop-out because it's kind of obvious. Because that guy, the guy that wrote the book, he knew Dali, right?
I know he brushed shoulders with Buñuel, and Buñuel brushed shoulders with Dali, so there's at least that connection.
Yeah, so my answer would probably be Buñuel, which, is maybe a cop-out because they're kind of running in the same circle. So it just seems like a sort of kind of like a tenuous, just sort of surface level connection. But when I actually think about it, I do think that this would be at least one of my top picks anyways, and he's bumped to the top by his associations. But like I said, when I read it, I saw it in black and white. It's set in the 1920s. It feels like kind of like a silent movie. So that's why my brain goes to Buñuel, because he directed in masters a lot of the time, like long, one take. Camera just kind of moves a little bit back and forth, follows the action, but everyone's shot kind of waist up, almost theatrically, almost just like you're just standing on the other side of the room watching the action go down. So he directs in these kind of big master shots, and then obviously, of course, he is a very surreal filmmaker, and he's a little bit more like absurdist and comical. And Movieland wasn't all. It was funny, but I don't know if I'd describe it as it's not a funny book, right? So, I might have to think about this longer to get a better answer, but I feel like, maybe the knee-jerk obvious answer is Buñuel, but I also feel like it works beyond the sort of just, connection he has with that world, or that artist group that guy is moving through, Ramón. So yeah, I think it works on multiple levels. So,
what about modern directors? I'm thinking of Damien Chazelle, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, you are.
And his recent masterpiece, Babylon, which you highly recommended to me as a maximalist film, and I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
What's the one-to-one here?
Yeah, and I mean, it could be that it was contextualized by both of us loving that film and thinking about it, but I don't think it's that far off. I think Babylon has that sort of grounded weirdness you were talking about, where everything seems to be grounded in things that do happen, did happen, could happen, but they're not normal. They're not everyday events. So some of the stuff in Movieland obviously goes a bit further, and it is sort of in a different world, but I think they're both sort of tethered to the same place. And I think they track pretty strongly to each other. I did certainly get some Babylon vibes from reading it. He has the chops to do it. Yeah.
It's amazing how much overlap there is, considering
Yeah.
how much temporal distance there is. We're talking about almost a century between these two works of art. So something's timeless about this Movieland place.
Agreed. And the Tobey Maguire stuff. I don't know how much we can spoil if anyone cares. I mean, I don't care. I'll spoil. But that whole sequence with Tobey Maguire and going into the underground, into hell, basically, feels like something that could be in this book. The book doesn't go that dark or anything like that, but just exactly what I think you nailed it with that kind of surrealist, grounded element. And the movie has a ton of that. And the movie, is based on. You almost can't call it a historical movie. Like Chazelle did a lot of research, but a lot of it is based on anecdotes, and he's playing into the myth. He's playing I think he's holding Hollywood at arm's length in some ways, and he's not afraid to criticize it and just kind of present it as this absurd thing. But the absurdity is also coming from the myth of it too. So, a lot of that stuff certainly never happened.
And people criticized him for it, like, come on.
Which is just okay. Just if you're a critic and you just give up if you're like, man, and even just that movie craftsmanship, just on a technical level, on a formal level, like in the midpoint of the film with the Margot Robbie's tear and the butterfly. It's like if you saw that and you're like, oh, this movie's so bloated and blah blah blah, it's like, Jesus Christ, dude, what do you just stop, just give it up.
Mm-hmm.
So
the war against minimalism is almost as eternal as the war against good and evil. Okay, we got a couple questions if you have time.
Yeah.
The staple question is, since we chose this book together, I'm wondering, why do you think it could be classified as invisible, first of all, and does it deserve more readers?
Yeah. Dude, it's so hard because there's so I want to say there's so much, but there also isn't. But part of it, like, I think it's kind of what I was saying about actors. Not exactly, but the same idea where, like, for every book that is a great book, there might be 2, 3, 4, 5 others that we'll never know of, that are invisible, which is, part of the work you do, the great work you do with that. And, why is that? And certainly there's an element of, maybe it's just not quite as good as it's not quite as great as the great books that are remembered. But I think a big part of it is luck, right? Who right place, right time, that could raise the great book we've remembered above the 3 and 4 that are on the same level. So notice, I'm not saying there are just everlasting masterpieces, inexhaustible masterpieces. I mean, there is for one person for one lifetime, but I'm not saying that it's just mostly other factors besides the book's quality that determine what makes it great. No, not at all. But I do think it's fair to say that for every great book there is, there might be 2, 3, 4, a handful others like it that are in obscurity, and the only thing separating them is luck. It's I'm in more of the kind of art world with my films. They're avant-garde, experimental, however you want to classify it. And one big lesson for me, as I'm sure you compare it from being an artist in any capacity, is that, and it's kind of depressing, but it's who you know. And that doesn't mean that it's not deserved. Like, the people who get the praise or who get known, they still objectively may very well deserve it. And it's great that they are getting the spotlight or whatever. But if there's someone out there who doesn't know the right people, or isn't in the right place at the right time, or, isn't even in the city, a given bigger city, for God's sakes, that could be the thing that makes or breaks it. So
he knew Buñuel, and he knew Diego Rivera, who did a portrait of him. Apparently that wasn't enough, at least to break into an English reading audience.
That's true. I guess I took the question more generally there, but in his regard, yeah, he did have that infrastructure in place, didn't he? It could be a symptom of how many books he wrote too. Like, he's pretty revered as an author, but this work isn't. So, didn't he write like 90 books or something? I don't know if
This is the only major book by him that was translated into English, and as the translator Ángel Flores says in the introduction, he hoped that this would be what kickstarts further translations. And there are some excerpts of things and maybe a couple novellas, but nothing major. And most of it's untranslated. I suspect he's more respected and recognized in Spain and other Spanish-speaking.
Yeah, I understand that he is. I think he is. I think he's a pretty significant figurehead of like surrealist literature and whatnot from that time in those countries. I mean, I guess that's just on us, right? On the English-speaking world, there's so much untranslated, especially when you go back, right, into the past. There's just, I mean, part of it is like your listeners, people who like this stuff, they're going to find it, they're going to seek it out, and maybe there's a case to be made that it should be more known amongst them, and but in the grand scheme of things, it's just how many people care enough to get translations going for this guy, right? Like, it's just,
yeah, there's a lot of hurdles, including
right
funds and translator or publishers giving it the green light. But
yeah,
Tough Poets did take a major step with this reprint and made it available for us.
Definitely.
So we're grateful for that. And if any translator is listening to this, please translate some more De La Serna for us. And I have one more question. It's a surprise question. Who would play Matt Taylor Blais in the film adaptation of your life?
Depends if I want to pick someone who's has the chops to just be who I actually am, or who just I want to play me, because it would just be like, they don't have to be anything like me at all. It's just, yeah, you that's who I am. You be me. Damn. I'll probably just go with my boy Audie Murphy. Throw him out there, because he's probably, when we're talking about presence, I don't know if there's anyone who has more presence than him. And he's nothing like me. We're nothing like each other, from what I could tell. But just the idea that Audie Murphy played me would be just, yeah, that's just who I would pick.
What has he done?
I mean, he's dead. So, like, this is totally hypothetical. He made B-movie westerns. If you want to get a good sense of what he was like, watch No Name on the Bullet. He's the most decorated soldier in American history. He killed like 50 Nazis by himself. Like, I actually never even confirmed this, but basically in Inglourious Bastards, that German guy, remember they make a film about him? Like, holding off like hordes of soldiers just by himself in the sniper tower. Have you seen Inglourious Bastards?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's basically what Audie Murphy did in real life.
Wow.
And he came back from the war, totally just this young guy, totally like fucked up by it, obviously, right? So he's doing these kind of just like innocent B-movie westerns, but his face, all that pain, all that trauma is there, and he just heightens these sort of kind of what should be a nothing character into just, he's actor as a tour, certainly, because you know me, I love B-movie westerns. I think there's a lot of artistic innovation and move the medium, huge leaps and bounds in the 40s and 50s, but a lot of those movies weren't just B movies, and a lot of those movies were helmed by great directors. Audie Murphy's movies, most of the time were not. It's him that heightens them, so you're not always getting like this great work of art from a directorial perspective, but every frame he's in, you just can't take your eyes off of him. So maybe this is an excuse to talk about him. Sort of pick him. Doesn't really work. Doesn't really make sense. He's like 5'4", but
I've been compared a couple times to Jake Gyllenhaal.
Oh yeah.
I've since lost my hair, but I remain. The thick eyebrows remain. I think we share something in the eyes. He's fairly handsome, to say the least. So I accept.
He's fairly handsome. Maybe I'll take him as well, because he tends to work with Canadian directors. It seems like he has a thing for Canadian directors. So maybe I'd actually have a shot.
Which directors or which films?
Oh well, he's worked with I'm gonna butcher the name. The French guys, right? Villeneuve, Denis,
Yeah.
right? And Jean-Marc Vallée, R.I.P. He worked with him in Demolition.
He had a great streak, starting with Nightcrawler, Nocturnal Animals, Enemy. Demolition was pretty good. I think he's since lost that streak, but those are some great films. And next, he'll play my biographical film.
Yeah, that's getting greenlit. Someone's going to hear this podcast and say, that's it. Perfect.
It'll be a man in a room working on a sophomore novel for 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, he had a good... Prisoners is another one. He had a good... mid 2010 streak. I'm not the craziest, like, biggest fan of all those movies, but I think he had a great run of like him as a performer, right? He definitely is the reason to watch a lot of those movies. He just doesn't, as a fellow Canadian Matt Johnson would say, he doesn't give up. He doesn't give up in those movies.
Well, we're going to have to give up on this podcast so you can pick up your child.
Yeah, too bad that we can't go a little bit longer. It's a lot of fun, and I'm always game to do another one. If you run out of friends, if you run out of book buddies, we'll just cycle back.
I've already run out. You're the only one.
Okay, well, let's do episode 2. What's it going to be?
Oh, it's a pleasure, and I hope to have you again, and take care, brother.
Yeah, thank you so much, George. Look forward to many more.
So there you have it. Thanks so much for listening to the debut episode of Invisible Book Buddies. Don't forget to subscribe to Sital Cinema on YouTube. That's Sital, Sital. They even accept films for potential publication. You can find my text review of Movieland at www.thekaleidoscope.com. among a mountain of other high-quality literary content. If you enjoyed this episode and want early access to content like this and other benefits, consider supporting my efforts through our Patreon page at patreon.com/thekaleidoscope. Every bit helps to fight against the apocalypse of wordlessness. You can also support the show by purchasing Movieland using the affiliate link in the description. For this book and many others, I encourage you to explore our bookshop store page at bookshop.org/shop/the Kaleidoscope. Be sure to tune in again next time because I have other exciting guests lined up for this segment and the podcast proper. Thank you.